The lantern's glow cut through the darkness, a small rebellion against the endless night. Clara's weathered hands trembled as she placed it carefully along the rusted tracks. 37 lanterns now lined the abandoned rail, each flame dancing in the gentle breeze. She straightened her back, bones creaking in protest, and listened. The whistle came as it always did, distant at first, then swelling until it filled the valley. Clara clutched the final lantern to her chest, its warmth seeping through her worn coat. 79 years of life had etched deep lines into her face, but her eyes remained clear and sharp as they fixed on the bend where the tracks disappeared into the pines. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing rumble. Not calling to anyone, speaking her own name like a prayer or a confession. The train emerged from the darkness, its headlight cutting through the mist. No passenger train had run on these tracks for 23 years. Yet it came, as it had for the past 3 nights, slowing as it approached. Clara held her ground as the massive iron beast hissed to a stop before her. The doors opened with a mechanical sigh. Empty. Always empty. Except for the silhouette that stood in the shadows of the last car. A figure Clara recognized even at this distance. Herself, not as she was, but as she might have been. Millfield had never been much of a town. A collection of weathered buildings huddled against the foothills, surrounded by fields that yielded just enough to keep everyone fed but never enough to help anyone get ahead. The train station had once been its heart, connecting Millfield to places where things happened, where lives could change. Clara's house sat on the edge of town, a small 2-story structure that had belonged to her parents and their parents before them. The paint had faded to a color that wasn't quite blue anymore. The porch sagged slightly on the left side. Inside, every surface held memories, photographs, trinkets, the accumulated weight of a life lived in one place. Each morning, Clara tended her garden. Tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, and herbs grew in neat rows. She worked methodically, her movements economical after decades of practice. The garden was her pride, one of the few things she had truly made her own. "Morning, Clara," Mrs. Hendricks called from the sidewalk. She was walking her terrier, as she did every day at precisely 8:30. Clara nodded and waved. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The same exchange, the same polite smile. Clara watched as Mrs. Hendricks continued down the street, disappearing around the corner. Then she turned back to her tomatoes, gently removing the yellowing leaves from the bottom of the plants. Inside, after washing the dirt from her hands, Clara made tea and sat at her kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She glanced at the empty chair across from her, the chair where no one had sat for more than a decade, not since her mother passed. The afternoon stretched before her. She would dust the living room, perhaps read another chapter of the novel on her nightstand, prepare a simple dinner for one. Maybe she'd call her niece in Columbus, though she rarely had anything new to report. Clara's gaze drifted to the window, beyond which she could just make out the distant line of trees that marked where the rail line cut through the landscape. For most of her life, she'd avoided looking that way. The letter changed everything. Clara had been clearing out the attic, a task she'd postponed for years. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old clothes, her father's tools. Behind a stack of photo albums, she found a small wooden box she didn't recognize. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, addressed simply, to Clara. She recognized her own handwriting immediately, though it was younger, more hopeful somehow. With trembling fingers, she opened it and began to read. "Dear Clara, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Tomorrow morning, I'm taking the 7:15 train to Chicago. I can't stay in Millfield any longer. There's a whole world waiting, and I want to see it all. I want to fall in love with someone who sees me, really sees me. I want to write stories that matter. I want to stand in front of paintings in museums and feel small and infinite at the same time. I'm leaving this letter because I'm afraid. Afraid that somehow I'll talk myself out of going. Afraid that the weight of expectation and routine will keep me here until it's too late. If you're reading this, and you're still in Millfield, know that I tried. I really did. Remember who we wanted to be. Clara, age 22. She sat on the dusty attic floor, letter clutched in her hands, as memories flooded back. The acceptance letter from Northwestern. The fight with her father. Her mother's illness that had come so suddenly. The decision to stay just until things settled. The months that became years. Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. She descended the attic stairs slowly, moving through the house like a stranger. In the hallway mirror, she caught her reflection, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, sensible clothes, the face of a woman who had lived a quiet life. Remember who we wanted to be, she whispered to her reflection. That night, she dreamed of trains. The rail line had been abandoned for decades, the tracks overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. Clara walked along them, her steps uncertain at first, then growing more confident. She carried a lantern, though it was still daylight. Something had drawn her here, something beyond the letter. As she walked, memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. Summer evenings spent with friends on the station platform, watching travelers come and go, imagining their stories. The first time she'd kissed James Miller behind the ticket office, both of them 17 and trembling with the newness of it all. The day she'd stood on this very spot, suitcase in hand, ticket to Chicago in her pocket, and then turned back toward town when she received word of her mother's collapse. The rail line stretched before her, disappearing into the distance. Clara followed it, moving farther from town than she had in years. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She lit her lantern. In the gathering darkness, Clara noticed something strange, a glimmer of light ahead. As she drew closer, she saw it was another lantern, sitting on the ground beside the tracks. She hadn't placed it there. No one used this path anymore. Beside the lantern was a small leather-bound book. Clara picked it up, holding it close to the light. A journal. She opened it to find her own handwriting again, but these were entries she had never written, describing a life she had never lived. September 15th, 1968, Chicago is everything I hoped it would be. The energy, the possibilities. I found a small apartment in Lincoln Park. My roommate, Elaine, works at the Tribune. She's promised to show me around the city tomorrow. December 3rd, 1969, met Michael today at the bookstore. He was looking for Kerouac. I was shelving Plath. Our hands touched, and I swear I felt something like electricity. He's asked me to dinner on Friday. July 8th, 1971. Michael proposed last night, under the stars at Lake Michigan. I said yes. We're thinking of a spring wedding, then perhaps moving to New York. He's been offered a position at Columbia. Clara sank to her knees, the journal clutched to her chest. These were her dreams, her hopes, written as if they had come true. As if she had boarded that train all those years ago. When she looked up, the sun had set completely. In the distance, she heard the unmistakable sound of a train whistle. Each evening, Clara returned to the rail line, walking farther along the tracks. Each night, she found another lantern, another piece of the life she might have lived. She began bringing her own lanterns, placing them along the path, creating a trail of light through the darkness. The journal entries continued, chronicling a life of love and loss, triumph and heartbreak, all the things that make a life full. Children born, books published, travels across continents, the death of Michael after 40 years of marriage, grandchildren, a retirement to his small cottage by the sea. On the third night, Clara reached a clearing where the rail line curved around a stand of ancient oak trees. Here, she found not a journal but a collection of photographs spilling from an old suitcase. She knelt beside them, holding her lantern close. The first photograph showed a young woman, herself, standing on a Chicago street, smiling broadly, eyes alight with possibility. In another, she stood beside a tall man with kind eyes and a crooked smile. Michael, she knew instinctively. Their wedding day. The birth of their first child. Family vacations. Book signings. Moments of ordinary joy. Among the photographs was one that made Clara's heart stop. James Miller, the boy she had loved in Millfield, the one she had promised to write to come back for. In the photograph, he was older, his face lined, standing outside a familiar house. Her house. He was looking at the camera with such longing that Clara felt it like a physical pain. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, James, still waiting. 1978. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. James had waited for her. In this other life, this life she hadn't chosen, he had waited while she built a different existence. And in her real life, the one where she had stayed in Millfield, she had turned him away, too afraid of what people would say about the town's bachelor school teacher and the spinster who cared for her ailing mother. She had rejected love twice, once by leaving, once by staying. The train whistle sounded again, closer now. Clara gathered the photographs and stood, her lantern held high. Through her tears, she saw the headlight approaching, illuminating the tracks ahead. For 3 nights, Clara had watched the train arrive. For 3 nights, she had seen the figure in the last car, her other self, the Clara who had left. Each time, she had been too afraid to approach, to confront the woman she might have been. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had seen James's face, had felt the weight of her choices, all of them, not just the choice to stay. The train slowed to a stop, steam hissing from beneath its massive wheels. The doors opened with that same mechanical sigh. Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward, lantern in one hand, photographs in the other. The platform was empty, the cars dark. Clara moved along the length of the train, her heart pounding in her chest. At the last car, she paused, then climbed the steps. Inside, the car was dimly lit. Plush seats lined the windows, but only one was occupied. A woman sat facing the door, her hands folded in her lap. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was herself, not as she was now, aged and worn, but as she might have been at 79 had she lived a different life. This Clara's hair was silver rather than gray, styled in a fashionable bob. Her clothes were elegant, her posture straight. But it was the eyes that struck Clara most, clear and bright, filled with a quiet confidence. "I've been waiting for you," the other Clara said, her voice stronger than Clara's own. Clara sank into the seat across from her doppelganger. "Are you real?" she whispered. The other Clara smiled. "As real as the choices we make. As real as the lies we imagine for ourselves. I found your journal. Your photographs." Clara placed them on the seat between them. "You lived a life I was too afraid to claim. And you lived a life I was too selfish to consider," the other Clara replied, touching the photographs gently. "I left our mother when she needed me most. I never saw her again before she died. I abandoned James to loneliness. But you loved. You traveled. You wrote books." Clara's voice broke. "You became someone. And you tended our garden. You cared for our parents until the end. You kept her home." The other Clara leaned forward. "Every choice closes doors, Clara, and opens others." "I've wasted my life," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No." The other Clara reached across the space between them, taking Clara's weathered hands in her own. "You lived it. As did I. Different paths, different joys, different sorrows. Why are you here now? After all these years?" The other Clara's eyes grew sad. "Because we're running out of time, you and I. Because there's one more choice to make." Outside, the train whistle sounded, a warning. The floor beneath them trembled as the engine came to life. "What choice?" Clara asked, suddenly afraid. "To forgive. To accept. To let go." The other Clara released Clara's hands and stood. "Come. There's something you need to see." They stood together on the rear platform of the train as it moved slowly down the tracks. Behind them, the lanterns Clara had placed glowed like fallen stars, marking the path she had taken. "Look," the other Clara said, pointing ahead. In the distance, more lanterns appeared, hundreds of them, lining the tracks as far as the eye could see. Each one, Clara somehow knew, represented a moment, a decision, a life that might have been. "All the paths we didn't take," the other Clara said softly. "All the lives we didn't live. There are so many," Clara whispered. "And yet, only one matters, the one we're living now." The other Clara turned to face her. "I've spent decades wondering about the Clara who stayed. Wondering if she found happiness in the quiet moments, in the garden, in the town that never changed. And I've spent my life wondering about the Clara who left," she replied. "Wondering if the world was as big and beautiful as she hoped." "It was," the other Clara said. "And it wasn't. Just as your life was both more and less than you expected." The train began to pick up speed. Wind whipped at their hair, at their clothes. "What happens now?" Clara asked, raising her voice above the growing roar of the wheels on the tracks. "Now you choose," the other Clara said. "You can stay on this train with me, see where it leads. Or you can return to your lanterns, to your home." "And if I stay?" The other Clara smiled, a smile tinged with sadness. "Then this becomes your life. The memories in those photographs, in that journal, they become yours. But the life you've lived, the garden you've tended, the people you've loved in your quiet way, those fade like dreams upon waking." Clara looked back at the receding line of lanterns, her lanterns. Then ahead, to the endless row of lights leading into the unknown. "And if I go back?" "Then you live the rest of your days in Millfield. You tend your garden. You make peace with your choices." The other Clara touched Clara's cheek gently. "And I return to my memories, to my regrets about the mother I abandoned, the town I left behind." The train whistle sounded again, urgent now. They were approaching a junction, tracks splitting in two directions. "I need to decide now, don't I?" Clara asked. The other Clara nodded. "At the junction. Left to continue with me. Right to return to your life." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the train beneath her feet. She thought of her garden, of Mrs. Hendricks and her terrier, of the quiet house with its ticking grandfather clock. She thought of James Miller, who had loved her twice and lost her twice. She thought of Chicago, of Michael, of children she had never born, books she had never written. When she opened her eyes, the junction was upon them. Clara stood alone beside the tracks, her lantern held high. The train had passed, continuing on into the night. She watched its taillights grow smaller, then disappear around a bend. She turned and began walking back along the line of lanterns she had placed. Each one still burned, casting pools of golden light on the rusted rails. In the distance, Millfield slept under a canopy of stars. Clara's steps were steady now, her back straight. In her pocket, she carried a single photograph, not one from the train, but one she had found in her attic the day after discovering the letter. It showed a young Clara standing on the platform of the Millfield station, suitcase at her feet, smiling at the camera. On the back, in her own youthful handwriting, "The day I almost left, 1965. She had chosen to return, not because her life in Millfield was perfect or because she had no regrets, but because it was hers. The garden, the house, the quiet moments, they were real in a way that the other life, for all its adventure and passion, could never be. As she approached the edge of town, Clara paused and looked back at the rail line one last time. In the moonlight, she could just make out the figure of the other Clara standing at the junction, watching her go. They raised their hands in unison, a farewell, an acknowledgement, a blessing. Then Clara turned toward home. Tomorrow, she would plant the tomato seedlings she had been nurturing on her windowsill. She would call her niece in Columbus. Perhaps she would walk past James Miller's old house and remember the boy he had been, the love they might have shared. And in the evening, she would sit on her porch and watch the sun set over Millfield, the town she had chosen, again and again, with all its limitations and quiet beauty. The lanterns along the rail line would eventually burn out, their light fading as dawn approached. But Clara carried their glow within her now, the illumination of understanding, of acceptance, of the peace that comes from embracing the life you have lived, with all its unopened doors and untraveled paths. In the distance, one final train whistle sounded, fainter now, moving away. Clara smiled and continued walking, her footsteps sure in the growing light of a new day.